undisputed king of stuff.
What is better for the king of stuff? Who should I have on as a guest other than the Pope of Ephemera, James Lileks himself? He needs no introduction, but let me give him a 10-minute introduction anyway. No, he's live from beautiful Minneapolis. James Lileks, how are you, sir?
I am fine, and it is beautiful. If you can see me, I don't know if you broadcast the video portions of this along.
Yes, I certainly do.
Well, then
and where's Mary Richards at? I don't see her.
Mary Richards. Well, let's see if I can tilt this up here. Well, no, we can't see her. We can't even see her office from here. But of course, she's fictional and doesn't exist, so there's that. But there is a statue of her downtown that I remember in the early days of the pandemic, walking around downtown, nobody there, and somebody had put a mask on the Mary Tyler Moore statue. And it was a long time before, and it kept getting replenished too. Somebody was keen to make sure that she had a full, I mean, nothing else sums up the period well than an inert statue that cannot aspirate is wearing a mask, just to remind us all to stay safe. Okay.
Remember, we're in a miserable time right now. Don't want you to forget about happier times when you used to sit and watch a comedy with your family without masks. But there you go. Well, how is we're just going to ramble all over the place, folks, because I think that's how both of our minds operate, which is why you adore us both so very much, why we're America's treasures. But how is Minneapolis doing? We've heard all these concerning things. I've only been to the city once. It was many years ago. There was an off-brand conference there that I was there very briefly for. Excuse me. I think I was there overnight. That was my exciting introduction to the city. I have some family connection. My wife's family is from beautiful Minneapolis. But what's going on there? Are you guys going to the dogs? Is there hopes? Are there some hopeful signs going on in the city that crime is not running rampant? What's happening there?
Big question and so many different ways to answer it. Is there hope? Yes, of course there is. Are we going to the dogs? No. Are things worse than they were? Yes. People believe somehow that downtown is in a state like San Francisco, where it's just hordes of drug-addicted zombies and the mentally ill staggering about, accosting people. It's not the case. I mean, I work downtown. I am never felt unsafe downtown, walking around anywhere. It's not particularly populated. It's emptied out in a horrible fashion because of the pandemic, and everybody went to work from home, didn't want to go back because they hate to commute and they like their jammies and their dog and the rest of it. And so why go downtown? Well, the knockoff effects on that have been catastrophic to the local economic ecosystem. We have all of the buildings downtown here connected in the second floor by skyways, which is great when it's 20 below. Really great when it's 20 below. But unfortunately, the loss of something we used to call customers means that all of the little shops that had the things to buy, the stores, the drugstores, the shoe shine places, the restaurants have been just hammered. So what was a vibrant, and I hate to use that word because it's always overused, and bustling, another cliche, but what was vibrant and bustling is now 20, 30% of what it used to be. And it's hard because you walk around and you see empty storefront after empty storefront, and you recall what was, and you think, well, that's not coming back, is it? For an awful long time. Now, the solutions that are being put in place are the usual. Nobody ever says, hey, tell you what, we got a bad thing going on here. Let's drop rents. Let's drop our tax rates. Let's cut regulation. Let's make it really easy for somebody to start up a business. No, we have plans to, if we move the buses from this street to this street, we can create a vibrant and bustling entertainment district in the night and liberalize the liquor laws a little bit so people can walk around without fear of getting tagged if they've got a mango margarita. Maybe that'll do it. No, that's not going to do it. What's going to do it is to have a sense of safety. And what we have, unfortunately, is a sense that there are feral elements at the margins. And nobody really seems to know what to do about that. I mean, you might say, okay, your light rail system is a moving homeless shelter. with people just nodding off and doing meth, and people feel really unsafe there. You might go back to your old Dragnet era prescriptions and say, okay, well, then we should send people in there to remove them. But now you can't really do that because homelessness is a problem, economic inequality and the rest of it. And until we solve these problems, we're just moving around from one place to the other. So we can't do anything about the immediate disorder because we haven't solved the structural problems that created it in the first place. Okay, how about crime? Well, we can't really put people in jail. I mean,
it's so rude.
Incarceration is a sign that we as a society have failed these people. So we can't do that. And policing is good, but if we let the police pull up people over for what used to be the usual, now regarded as specious reasons, you got a taillight out, you got an instrument, but you got an equipment violation, you don't have your tags on, you got no license plate, and pull them over. Well, if there's a disparate impact with that, then it shows that structural racism is the impetus again behind our law and order campaign. So we really can't do that until we eliminate the problems with structural racism, et cetera. So everybody knows what can be done. I mean, it's not hard to have basic civil order in a society, but the will to do it is hampered by a little sort of squick factor that it's not right to do these things. We did these before, and what happened? We generally had a clean, well-ordered society with a social compact and high social trust and all the rest of it, but we don't have that much anymore.
Yeah.
So that's all really unfortunate. But like I say, I don't feel unsafe. I don't. But at the same time, my wife was almost held up at gunpoint about 2 blocks from her house because there was a riot at the school. And there were some guys who got out guns, and there was a stabbing, and 3 of them accosted my wife to look for somebody. And when my dog lunged at one of the guys, his hand went to his waistband before he thought better of it. That's 2 blocks from my house. It never happened before.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you spend every day in this beautiful place, and it is beautiful, and I'm close to the creek, and the neighborhood is lovely and all the rest of it. But at the same time, you hear screaming up and down the streets, the cars of the drivers who have no particular fear of any retribution for acting poorly and screaming their tires at night and doing 60 miles an hour in residential streets. What it will take for Minneapolis citizens to say, I wonder if there's any connection possibly between our voting patterns and the built-in assumptions of the people for whom we reflexively vote. I wonder if there could, just hear me out, connection between their worldview and the world in which we find ourselves now. That's an interesting idea. Maybe we have to interrogate that. When we start to have that conversation, then we'll go back. Well, you mentioned Mary Tyler Moore at the top of this. There was a different Minneapolis. It had a different level of social trust. It was it was more cohesive, and it had that sort of Scandinavian idea that you had in welfare states. That there was a bargain, a Minnesota miracle, we called it. We were going to put up with very high taxes because we were going to get a lot in return. The streets would be good, the schools would be good. We would have there would be generous welfare, but it would be for people who needed it, etc. And that worked for a while. But when you start to have the breakdown of the social compact and less social capital, then it doesn't. So I'm always hopeful, but at the same time, I'm not an idiot.
Yeah, it's it kind of like I guess it was last summer. I was like 10 days in Newport Beach, California. And every time I drive, I decided to drive. Every time I drive to California from the Phoenix area, I'm a little more sad than the last time I did because just things have just broken down that much more. Another year of decline. When I was a kid, when we would go there, it was like, oh my gosh, this is the Golden State. This is going to be so much fun. There's Disneyland and there's the beach and all this cool stuff going on. And well, this conference was in Newport Beach, which people were like, well, that must have been nice. I was like, yeah, it's lovely. But a lot of it, you would just see these, very happy, well-to-do people on their little day trips on their tiny little sailboats that they have. And you just felt like you just peek over the hedges and you see the mobs gathering. You're in Versailles. Everything is going great. But just over that fence, there's something coming for you. And it was just kind of an unsettling feeling the whole time I was there, because like I know I'm in a snow globe right now. I'm not in real California, because again, you drive a couple miles inland and you're like, oh, okay, here's what's happening to the whole Los Angeles in general. Well, one thing I wanted to bring you on, I had the worst idea for clickbait in internet history, which was, you actually offhand mentioned you weren't the biggest fan. You had just been to Barcelona. And you mentioned you're not the biggest fan of this massive church, Sagrada Familia, by Antoni Gaudí.
Right.
And I thought, I'm going to start a rap beef with James Lileks over Antoni Gaudí. This is going to take, the TikTok generation loves this. This is what the Zoomers are all about, these intense fights. For some reason, it didn't take over, but it did touch on...
Point of view. You've expressed a contrary opinion on Gaudí. I can just hear the
right.
Would they stop saying
not
point
take
of
the
view?
internet. Yeah. So we had a discussion about that, which was great. But getting into that, you're one of these people who, when you get vaguely interested in something, it's like, okay, now I need to know every single thing there is to know about this thing, because you enjoy learning, you want to compare. Oh, okay, what is this guy doing compared to that guy? But architecture is one of the things. Why have you, as long as I followed your writing since the dawn of I don't know, pre-blog, I don't know, blog, Lileks.com, you've talked about architecture in New York City, in Washington, D.C., in your hometown of Fargo, in Minneapolis. What appeals to you about it? Because I've always been interested in it, and I will rant to my friends about the facade of some, I don't know, 2-story flat in a suburb, and they're like, what's wrong with you?
It is the most public of arts. It is the most commonplace. It is an expression of human will manifest in stone and glass and brick and the rest of it that endures. It is a signpost for an era. It is an expression of what a culture believes in. It is a monument left behind by people who will never know. It is the skyscraper that goes up 100 floors and is essentially a handmade object, in that the brick at the top of it is placed by a human hand. The story will never know. According to the designs of men who wrote with pen and paper, with no computers and protractors and T-squares and the rest of it. The ingenuity, the complexity, the sheer American exuberance of some tower leaping into the sky, be it in a historical fashion or in some sleek modern design, is just inspirational to me. It's just, I like being in places where you have that sort of urban compression that you get when you have tall towers jostling and competing, or arranging a little symphonic dance around each other. I always wanted to be an architect because I was fascinated by the past. I was fascinated by the way in which we had all of these buildings that harkened back to the Roman era, for God's sakes. Rome, in Fargo, North Dakota, you had buildings that were modeled after the ideas of Vitruvius, of the great Roman architects. And so here you have in Fargo, in a little Carnegie Library, you have a line that you can draw back to the emperors, back to the Republic, to the Roman Republic, and there's a historical cultural continuity there that reminds you of what Western civilization is, or at least was. So I love it, and I'm not sure I can defend it any more than that, other than to say that to study architecture is to study the ways in which people have built their environments and what that says about them and their culture and their times. And sometimes it says bad things. Sometimes it says really inspirational things. And usually, as you have with human beings, it's somewhere in the middle, a mix of commerce, art, faith, and the rest of it. But the end result is fantastic places like Barcelona, which, sort of an urban planner's dream or dystopian nightmare, depending on who you look to, because block after block after block after block of regular shaped, regular formed, regular sized, identically sized buildings. But yet somehow it is this extraordinarily livable place that's just beautiful. You take the same idea, block after block of buildings that are the same height, and you put it in an American 1960s public works context, and you have a nightmare. Why is that? Why does one culture produce beauty and the other culture produce something else? So Gaudí in Barcelona the Sacred Family Church. The general idea is that you're supposed to be completely awed by it, which I am, and that you're also supposed to be knocked over by it, which anybody would be, but also that you're supposed to think that it's really incredible and fantastic. And incredible, I will give you. It is that. Fantastic, it is too. But I think it's possible to not like it, to admire it, and to want to know more about it and be fascinated by it, but still not to like it. And the reason that I don't is that it always strikes me as just something that's excreted from the abdomens of very interesting beetles. It's insecticide. It breaks with every single convention of church architecture that we know. Now, sometimes that's good. Church architecture, as we know, goes through its many phases. It goes from it's Romanesque in the 1000s. It goes to the Gothic, which itself has its the lancet, the perpendicular, and the international, and all the rest of the ways. And then that morphs eventually into a different style, a different paradigm, which is the Renaissance, the one which is based on Rome. And that goes on for a long time until the post-war era here in America, where all of a sudden we're doing these Miesian strange things that could be banks, but maybe are churches as well. So every era has a style. But Gaudí broke so much with the prevailing style of the time in such a hallucinogenic way that I think he ought to be held accountable for that as well as being praised. Now, that said, that's the exterior. The interior still has the vocabulary of what we took to be the church architecture of the time. You can see the way it's laid out, the columns that are all stylized in this strange Gaudí way. But the stained glass, the columns, the doors, the orientation is still within the vernacular of the era. So you can't just say he made everything up. But the clash between the interior and the exterior is one of those things that I think you can say, I don't like that. And then you can go walk inside and say, this is the greatest place I've ever been. It is amusing that he's buried in the basement, but in the foundation of the old Spanish Baroque style church. So he is nestling actually in the sheltering arms of the tradition that actually made his experimentation possible. I just don't know how he got everybody to go on board with that, because you had a standard Spanish Baroque church, right? And then the guy who's doing it quit the job or died or something. I can't remember. And so Gaudí gets the job. And he goes back to the church fathers and says, actually, here's what I'm thinking, and shows them these things with these towers and these strange, incrustations on it. And they look at that and everybody just says, yeah, I could, okay, all right, give it a shot. And he gets the go ahead for this. There's nothing else like it in the world for a Christian church. So I'm glad he did it. I'm glad it's there, and it's one of the things that makes Barcelona incredible. But I think you and I were talking about this before. Gaudí's buildings in Barcelona are well loved for a reason. They have that sensuous curve of the Art Nouveau, right? Mm-hmm. And Art Nouveau was one of those things that came along, and that's why you have me on the show, because I say it's one of those things that came along. You can quote me. No, it was one of those movements that arose in the late 19th century, the reaction against the dead hand of tradition and historicity. We're going to invent some stuff. We're going to do some organic stuff. And so Art Nouveau turns out to be more organic. Like most of these things, it doesn't get generally applied, but it's applied enough so that every city in Europe has a couple of examples. And then it usually runs into the wall of economic collapse or a panic or a depression or something. Think of the modern style in America, what we associate, what we call Art Deco, which really isn't, like Rockefeller Center, all the great little banks that WPA built, that the 1933 or the 1939 World's Fairs. My God, those things are beautiful. I love them beyond compare. But because they came along at a time of economic contraction, there wasn't every city having a 30, 40-story modern tower being built, right? Right. So this style, which again broke with history and was going to be the new style, runs into a brick wall, has enough interesting examples around so that we can imagine what cities might have been if it had been more adapted. And Art Nouveau was sort of like that. So Barcelona is built on a rigorously classical model. Everything there is standard issue 19th century, 18th century classicism, and it's fantastic because of it. So Gaudí works in there because the sensual curves of Art Deco play against the rigorous lines of everything else. And if everything in Barcelona was like Gaudí, and everything was sort of moving around and curvy, and the forms were a little bit balloony,
feel nauseous.
Right. Well, that would be part of it. You would feel after a while a little queasy because everything was so. And the guy who built the rigorous 1930s Bauhaus or the 1960s international style thing would be the savior, would be revered like Gaudí, right? Even though the work is nothing like it. So a context is everything when you talk about architecture, and that's why it's fun to talk about.
Yeah, and I think why I'm a fan of his is just the same reason I will like a musician who just comes completely out of left field. And I'm like, how did you even come up with this? I can't even find out who influenced you. Where on earth did you get it? Because my paradigm, just what I always liked was basically I want to live in a white box and, just clean lines and modern and mathematical. And for someone just to say, oh, no, I understand all the math and stuff, I'm just going to use it this completely different way. I'm like, okay, that hurts my brain because I'm just like, no, I need my perfect little Scandinavian, symmetrical, clean, white lines. And he was just so insane. I think I was interested in architecture from a young age because I was exposed to a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright until I was an elderly, wise 6-year-old. We lived in the Chicago area. And my dad would point out, oh, and that's a Frank Lloyd Wright house. And then when we moved to Arizona, we go to a church which was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. And so just from early on, and also too, we would tour Taliesin West, which was Frank Lloyd Wright's kind of school where you had to pay him to live in the desert and do all his work for him. Right. But it was just around me all the time. And I just got interested in it. But then in high school, I had several different advisors who were like, oh, no, architecture's dead. It's all going to civil engineering. You should just go into engineering instead or something like that. And so everybody kind of threw me off the chase, which is probably good because I've known professional architects now who work in these massive firms and everything's designed by committee. It is not this great singular man's vision of the future. It's a committee and hey, we got budgets and we need to, unlike Gaudí, we have to go to the church council who can't agree on what brand of coffee to serve on Sunday morning and say, oh yeah, we're going to do this completely radical design nobody's seen before. Right. They're like, where do we have Vacation Bible School?
Well, unless, of course, that you have hired a starchitect, some European guy who is Koolhaas, the rest of who is known for dropping off these peculiar things, these visions into cities where they don't belong. They completely break every single law of the organic development of a city is. And they generally look at, people always refer to them as Frank Gary's building as the Klingon embassy or something like that, because it just strikes so much with what people are expected to. And I'm not a big Gary fan except for a couple of buildings. But you go back to Wright. There was the romantic notion of the architect, right? The genius, the fountainhead, and the rest of it. And before Wright, there was Sullivan. And Sullivan I love because he was distinctly American.
Fantastic.
He came up with a uniquely American vernacular of organic architecture that was just cool. And he had disciples, and a few of them were here in Minneapolis. There are some buildings that we have that were Sullivan-esque that are just writhing with this explosion of wonderfully ornate carvings. And they're rare because for the same reason as with the other styles that broke with historicity, they lacked mass adoption. There were economic reasons, but just about every city got one or two. And you mentioned Chicago. Chicago, of course, is the home of the auditorium building, a lot of Sullivan's work. I was just in Chicago 3, 4, 5 weeks ago or so. And I had to pay a pilgrimage to all my old friends. I had to go see the Tribune Tower, which is a ridiculous building. I'm sorry, it is. And Raymond Hood is one of my favorite architects because he could work in every single possible medium. He could do historical Gothic, he could do modern, he could do Deco, he could do modern. He was a brilliant man. But this is a ridiculous building, and I love it. It has buttresses at the top of it. There's nothing to buttress up there. It's just it's completely divorcing them from any sort of structural reason and putting them up there as an ornamentation. But of course, we all know the story that the Tribune Tower competition was this worldwide invitation, tell us what we should build. And while they went with the safest design, the things that came along from other architects turned out to be quite influential, Lewis and Saarinen and the rest of it. So I go there and I look at this thing and I pat it on the side and say, it's been a long time, my friend. And then I walk around a little bit more. Every time I'm in Chicago, I find something new. I found a couple of buildings that are absolutely rote, uninteresting skyscrapers to modern studies. The Field Building is one, and the Bankers Building to the next of them. They're almost identical. They're almost to the same style. They're the 1920s, U-shaped because you want the light shaft, and then with a tower on top of it. One of them is in the 20s, so it's got a lot of decoration. The others, the Field is in the 30s, mid-30s actually, so it's modern and sleek. Nobody talks about these buildings. Nobody celebrates them, but they're just enormous structures. And any city that had either one of them, it would be one of their landmarks. And in Chicago, it's just sort of this forgotten building because so much monumentality and so much innovation has come afterwards. So a walk in downtown Chicago becomes visually exhausting and overwhelming and exhilarating because even if you don't get to the new stuff, even if you don't get to the Opera House, that fantastic building, you just discover something that is so fargan big and just this wonderfully American thing, this commodification of space, this saying, we're going to take that point in the sky up there that's 37 stories tall, and we're going to enclose it in steel and masonry, and we're going to make money off that point in the sky. And it's going to be beautiful at the same time. Now, the great thing is across the street is a 1960s Mies style building that goes back to what you're talking about. There isn't going to be any architecture anymore. There's just going to be engineers because styles were so standardized. You didn't need architects, right? You just give us the zoning envelope.
It's the end of history.
Right.
Yeah.
Give us the zoning envelope and we'll put it up. So across the street from these two old buildings is a 1960s Mies black glass, I-beams hanging onto it to indicate whatever, that whole thing. And it works in that context because there's not block after block of them. If there's block after block of those museum buildings, you are in a Soviet style.
Brasilia.
You're in Brasilia. But here, just the play between these three buildings and the different things that they represent and the things you can infer from the culture and the time and the era of who put them up. And this is just an ordinary corner in Chicago. So that's why it's just absolutely exhilarating to go there. But when you said that architecture is dead, and they were wrong, of course, about that. I mean, here, you may see that thing, the big building behind me? Right?
Yep,
the tallest one. That's Caesar Pelli. That is essentially Rockefeller Center, which he built in New York. And it is gorgeous. It's just a complete swipe of 30 Rock, and it's fantastic. And a little thing down there, which is really dull, was one of the most innovative pieces of urbanism in America at its time because of the way it incorporated skyways, the first ones, and interior shopping courts, but we still don't like it very much. This one here is the Ameriprise building, which is pretty standard late 80s, late 90s stuff here. Let's take a look at this big honking guy. See that? Do you see historical references there? Don't you just?
Oh, yeah.
That is by Cohn Pedersen Fox, which was one of the leading late postmodern architecture firms. And they built stuff that had a clear lineage back to the 30s and 40s, great architecture of the country. And so we've got that. We have everywhere here. We've got a Helmut Jahn around the corner that is just straight out of Miami Vice. We have, Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill Dullard. That's 35 stories. It's kitty corner from here. Everybody came to town and gave us one. Caesar Pelli gave us one. Caesar Pelli built the library. We got Jan. We got KPF. So we have this collection of just about every single architectural idea. Philip Johnson built the IDS Center back there, which is the best glass skyscraper in America. So we've got a beautiful downtown that's a gallery of fantastic work and fantastic architecture. And I'm proud to be here for that. Can't remember what your question was, but I think I did.
It's a ramble. It's a Lilexian ramble. It's a ramble. Well, what do you think about, I don't know. I follow a lot of accounts across social media and stuff that talks about, we need traditional architecture. We need that.
Culture critic.
Which
way, Western man?
And it's like, I love the traditional things, but at the other hand, it's just like to respect tradition, to respect what they did in the past, doesn't mean you have to turn the clock back. It's almost like, no, they believed differently. They had a different attitude about man's relation to nature, man's relation to progress. And they made great architecture, regardless of the technology, the means, even the amount of money that they had on hand. you can make great architecture in any age, and you can keep innovating and doing new stuff.
Right.
But when you do it just to poke people in the eye, or
Yes.
you build something that's a horrible place to work, it's like, okay, you failed architecture 101. You are here to serve the people and not just I don't know, make some monstrosity like Gary, like you talked about. He has in Las Vegas, can't remember the title of it, but it's basically a huge memory care facility. And he's got these crazy curvy circus shape with warped windows. The entire
the brain
yeah,
institute.
yeah, exactly. And I just imagine somebody who's there for some kind of therapy. Look, I'm older, I'm having some mental health issues, I'm having just like physical brain issues, and you just see this funhouse mirror of reality, and you're like, no, I'm out.
The European architects
they
love to do with that. They love to just drop their trousers and squat on what has been built before for the sheer joy of despoiling what they regard as the dead hand of the past. And this, I mean, this goes to every problem that we have in society, in Western society these days, because it's one thing to have a rote reverence for the past, and okay, the past is great, we can learn from it, but it's another to be actively mitigating against the destruction of its reputation, because the past is where all the bad things were, and now we know better. Now we're better and more virtuous, so the more we shuffle off those institutions, ideas, traditions, etc., that were complicit in the past, the faster we'll move to the wonderful utopia. And they always, of course, figure that they can take away the strength and legitimacy of every single institution and system, but that somehow groceries will still appear in the street and power will still be on in the buildings and the rest of it. Like they can just remove one piece at a time and still keep the same structure, but it'll be much ethically better, don't you know? That's what drives me nuts about some of these. Wrote on the site the other day about Target funding this group that wants to get rid of the Mount Rushmore. When you know that every Target executive has taken their kids to Mount Rushmore and had a great time, but at the same time, we have to get rid of it. But anyway, the architects in Europe, there are accounts. Yes, devoted cultural critic and the rest of us to which way Western man, and we should bring back these things. And oftentimes they seem a little too enamored of just ornamentation for its own sake. And while I agree that a magnificent piece of gilded Baroque Rococo architecture with all of its froth and color can be a fantastic thing, it doesn't mean that that the Guggenheim itself isn't also an expression of a different kind of beauty and a different kind of sensibility, and we don't have to choose between the two. I would pat one of those sites on the back for saying that, and it's one of the sites that always praises the old churches and the rest of it, for making a long argument in favor of modern architecture, modern skyscrapers. Called them Art Deco, which bugs me, but I've lost that battle. And he went and just went one after the other of the tops of the great modern skyscrapers around the country, from Detroit to Los Angeles to, of course, New York, and made the case that there was an optimism to these things. There was this, and granted, a lot of it is that sort of things to come, smart guys in white smocks who can figure everything out, techno optimism, and that got knocked on its ass by World War II. But if you can get away all the Fabian, all the socialism, all the technocrat rule by the elite stuff, you still have an expression of confident, positive modernity that was rising at a time when civilization was kind of on its heels. And I appreciate that, and I love it. It's Buck Rogers. It's fantastically imaginative, beautiful stuff, and it has nothing to do with anything that went before. And it's now in America we love these skyscrapers and take them as part of our cultural heritage. So they've become part of history. But at the time, the break that they symbolized was quite extraordinary. And I think the fact that they, like a lot of Gaudí, like the art, the Deco and the modern, eventually, the culture, if it is a thing of beauty and has something to say about the human spirit that resonates with us, we will incorporate it into our traditions. The European architects you're talking about are take a crap on the street and build these ridiculous things that look like aliens have descended and smothered a block with some, are not taken it to heart, because there's something anti-human about them, anti-Western and anti-human. We have one of these here, the Guthrie Theater. They spent a lot of money on it,
Mhm.
and I think it's, I can forget who it is, but it's a blue glass building that is plopped into an old riverside industrial area that's entirely stone. It's all stone, and into that they put blue glass, of course, and it has nothing to do with anything. Doesn't blend, doesn't harmonize, doesn't even attempt to get along. It is a solipsistic interloper. But everybody loves it because it's the Guthrie, and
There you go. Yeah. James Lileks, I'll include links on where to find your stuff. Where would you like your devoted listeners to go to find out more of your stuff?
Well, lileks.com is where you start. That's where the main page is, and it has links to all the subsites. And I have to warn people that the links themselves go to hundreds of pages because I've been at this for so long and I can't stop, and it's a sickness. At one point, I was doing a site about, I found some interesting things from the 1930s. SpongeBob card a few moments later. I've committed myself for some reason to doing every decade of the 20th century according to what I find and what particularly interests me. And and so if you click on the 80s link, you will find hours of commercials. You will find hours of magazine ads. You will find all kinds of stuff when I was going through my 80s phase. And for a while there, for a couple of years, when I had, if you clicked on the link to the 90s site, you just got the AOL dial-up thing, and that never stopped, just a road. But I realized I got to do it because I'm coming to understand that the 90s are a fascinating decade that those of us who lived through did not know how good we had it. And did not know exactly what was coming. And in retrospect, it's a attenuation of the 80s and then this sort of mixed period where we're so wealthy and so much at ease and so much at peace. We have to worry about UFOs and Fox Mulder finding a government plant about that, all of which changed on an afternoon in September in 2001.
Yeah.
So that's the next big thing. But generally, it's my train set. It's my hobby. It's my contribution to the internet. Because in the early days of the internet, and I know I'm going on and you got to go, but there was this thing called Yahoo Site of the Day. And every day you would go there and call up Yahoo. It's like, wow, there's 12 new sites today. Wow. I'm going to explore these 12 new sites on the internet. And there was this general idea, this FYI thing we had, a DIY thing, that we kind of had to come up with stuff to keep this internet thing going. It was up to us. And so we would make sites and then hope you'd get cool site of the day, and done my part for the internet today. So I've been at this since 1997. And that idea that I sort of owe something to the internet, which gives me so much every day, that I owe something back is never really slacking. What an idiot, you think. Well, I do shake the tin cup and ask for money. So there's that. But it generally is a cultural warehouse that is pretty damned big. The largest collection of annotated matchbooks in the entire internet. I'm pretty sure of that. I am pretty sure of that.
I will remember to save that on my stumble upon link there, and we'll be good to go.
I'm going to go full Biden here and just eat my ice cream.
Definitely.
All right,
James Lileks,
all right, brother.
Thanks for being on. Great to chat with you anytime. I just
that
knew
wasn't
that
a
we
chat.
could just
that
start
wasn't
talking.
a chat. Yeah, that wasn't a chat. That was you saying a couple of things and me taking complete advantage of the fact that you're going to let me go and just going and so that the window washers are coming by.
Right. All right.
You know why?
Well, thanks for being on.
Because it's one job you can't do from home.
Yeah, true. See you, sir.